if you are a health practitioner, are you a health coach, a nurse, a doctor, uh, a physician's assistant, any number of different things, you probably got into this profession because you care about people. And the way that health is going right now, there are tests that are overlooked. There are activities that are overlooked that people need to know about in order to help clients and patients to actually get well. And that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm Dr. Rita Marie Loscalzo, and I'm here with Dr. Yvonne Castillo. And we are really passionate about helping health practitioners to really help people, not just band aid over symptoms, not just give them like, $5,000 worth of tests and try to figure it out, but really to make changes that affect their overall functioning, their overall balance in their body so they can get well. So if you're a health practitioner and you want to do that and you want to achieve that with your clients, you are in the right place. So let's just jump in and get started. So we have two tests that we have found to be absolutely critical in order to help people that you need to know how to run and you need to know how to review in order to help people identify those root causes, identify the true underlying causes. And we're running an online 3-day summit, short, sweet, just 8 or 9 of us speakers on there to give you some great information. And during that interview process, this came up over and over and over again. So, are we ready to unveil?
Yeah.
Why don't you share why don't you share the first one?
The first one is, and this was it was brought up on, again, like she said, themes over and over again, is so many people forget the basics. And especially in functional medicine, we're seeing people jumping to more advanced tests, but then they're missing the basics. And the basics, there's so many gems in the basics, starting with the foundational pieces, and particularly this type of testing too, which one of our speakers brought up with. He's like, there is more validity and proof behind this one test than most others out there. And what is it? It is blood chemistry. There's so many gems that can be found in your blood chemistry. The biggest gap and mistake that we're often seeing is that people are not running complete or comprehensive panels. And that's something that we cover in the summit, and particularly the 3 different scenarios that would dictate which type of panel that you would run for your particular client. The other big gap that we're seeing is a lot of people do not know how to interpret a blood chemistry panel. And also the meter stick that they're using to gauge the biomarkers that are there is not necessarily an indicator of thriving or optimal health. It is, are you just meeting the threshold or the criteria where I could put a diagnosis on you, write you a prescription, but not, it doesn't serve what most clients and people are actively seeking out right now. Is they want to be their best. They also want to prevent getting sick. They don't want to stay sick. And they don't want the only solution to be pills or a procedure, or like one of our speakers, Dr. Diggin Weatherby, said, the not yet. Like, oh, I'll just wait around until I'm sick enough for, something to be done about this. This actually happened to a personal friend of mine. She'd had multiple miscarriages, and the doctor actually told her, oh, well, we'll just wait till you have your 3rd miscarriage until we do testing. And she ended up having something that could be easily detectable on functional blood chemistry if you knew what you were looking for. And then that would have driven them, and they would have seen that there was a genetic predisposition going on. She had a blood kind of disorder into there. She was clotting too much. But if people would have run a full panel, they would have seen that.
Yeah. And that's what's sad. I loved when he said that, the curse of not yet, or
the not yet.
The not yet. You don't have diabetes yet. Therefore, we're not going to test your insulin levels. We'll wait till you have it. You don't have heart disease yet. right? Therefore, we're not going to run an advanced lipid panel
Right.
to find out if there are things that we can correct. And not don't get me wrong, that's what's taught in medical school. So
Mhm.
it's not your fault if you're not doing this, and we're not here to put the blame game on or
Mm-mm.
make you bad or wrong. It's really about what can you learn that's going to help people so the not yet doesn't really happen, because
Mhm.
unfortunately the not yet, it comes to fruition
Mhm.
oftentimes in at least half the cases, right? People who have heart disease, they find out when they have a heart attack oftentimes,
Mhm.
at least
Yeah.
50% of the cases, right? And I don't want that to happen to people that I love or
Mhm.
care about. I don't want it to happen to the people who have entrusted their care to me, and I don't want it to happen to their loved ones either. I want us to be able to look and say, there's some stuff here that we need to go a little deeper with. And you can get that from a regular blood chemistry interpreted in a functional way, interpreted with different guidelines.
Right. Like you said, no one just wakes up one morning and has diabetes.
No.
And it's same thing with strokes or heart attack. It doesn't just instantly happen. There was
No.
a series of imbalances that had to take place. And I always tell people, like, the body is absolutely brilliant at letting you kind of survive, but that doesn't necessarily allow you to thrive. So what then
Right.
starts to happen is your body then starts to draw on all these other systems to fill in the gaps. And those systems, they all work together, but the kidney isn't meant to do the job of the liver, so it's like as things are starting to break down and there's imbalance, the same thing too is when we see, people that are really inflamed or an acidic diet, what starts to happen to the bones, right? Where does the body want to neutralize things? It will go, okay, great, I'm going to go get my minerals from the bones,
Yep.
or if
Yep.
you're not detoxing appropriately, what does the body do? I want to protect myself, so where am I going to store all my toxins? Let's go store them in some fat cells and through there
Right.
too. So the body, has this capacity to try to protect you,
Yep.
but it's not necessarily productive into there. And that's why I tell people, so you don't just wake up one day. It's like this unraveling thread that starts to go.
Right.
And then eventually, sometimes people don't even notice something's wrong until they really have, like you said, a heart attack, sometimes an adverse effect, or they get these symptoms that are just non-relenting. And that's, I think, the tricky thing too, especially when people feel better, they feel worse. They felt the worst because you can kind of convince yourself like, oh, okay, the problems, like the symptoms are
It's
gone
gone.
for a
It's
while,
okay.
so I'm
Yep.
okay. And I think that's probably the biggest mistake people make is when symptoms are gone or feeling everything's fine. And Dr. Carrie Jones of Rupa indicated that she's like, there's a lot of people that are sick, but they look really healthy. Like if you're
Yeah.
walking down the street, they're like, oh, they're fit, they can do all this stuff. But underlying, if you look down, there's these little kind of white flags that are wavy, or these symptoms that people can kind of just like, oh, okay,
It's normal. Everybody's like that.
well, that's a big one, is because if they look around, especially with their friend group, oh, everybody experiences. And I had this with one of my professional cyclists, is he was having digestive issues, but he thought it was totally normal because that's what his sphere
Group.
of professional athletes was like. Oh yeah, of course they're going to totally have,
Mhm.
issues with bowel movements and all this stuff, or energy. And so they get in this thing of like, okay, where they're just kind of squashing symptoms with,
Right.
popping Advil and Aleve, and it's like, that's not really like normal, or taking proton pump inhibitors or all those types of
Right.
things. But so
Antacids are
that's
common.
where,
Everybody
uh-huh.
takes them.
So that's where, again, too, a lot of people are like, okay, the curse of kind of normal too, because we see the same thing on blood chem, right? Oh,
Right.
it's normal. You're normal.
Right. But what does normal mean? And
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
want you to not accept that for your
Right.
patients. I want you to be looking for them to be optimal, right? And to let them know that that's a possibility,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot people don't know that. They figure everybody takes antacids, everybody takes Advil. Look at the commercials on TV. So of course I do. Is there something wrong with that? And as functional practitioners, as we're doing a very comprehensive functional
Mm-hmm.
history, we're noticing things hopefully, before they go downhill into disease. So I like to talk about dysfunction versus
Mm-hmm.
disease. And people think it's normal to be in a state of dysfunction, to be exhausted, to have gas and bloating, to need, take your antacids. My sister, she is no longer with us. She ended up with lymphoma, and she died because nobody noticed these little things over the years. But when we went to visit, instead of like some people have a big bowl of fruit on their counter, she had a basket with all of her over-the-counter medications, right? The Aleve or whatever it was back then, Tylenol, the Maalox and the heartburn. What's the one that most commonly people use? Anyway, Tums.
Oh, Tums, yeah.
Right. She just had all of those things in a basket on the counter, where those of us who are into health might have had a fruit basket or a bowl of nuts or, something along those lines.
That's so funny that you said that, because one of my athletes, she said that's what she said. They used to have literally a candy jar of Tylenol, and she would tell me how many, like the big one that they would go through like in weeks between just like a couple of the girls. And I was like, whoa, we know what the consequence of that is. And you brought that point up too, is just like those little white flags are starting to be waved. And when you do a comprehensive panel, like you will start to see the little white flags being raised, but then also through the trends over time and through kind of like multiple systems will kind of support the other ones. But you'll see, you're like, well, people not necessarily will be like, oh, is cholesterol telling me something that is going on in the thyroid? Like most people don't know how to look at all the systems, but as in a whole.
Right.
And really, when you know how to do that, it really gives, like I tell people, it's like having a magnifying glass, like having a scope versus kind of having blurred lines. I always think of like when you go to get your eyes checked and they kind of go, can you see clear? Can you see clear? So when you clear, that's where I think of like when you have a comprehensive panel and you're looking at markers of detoxification, digestion, like an actual complete metabolic panel, not just fasting glucose. When you're seeing the insulin or markers of inflammation, it really starts to show you where is the body struggling, where does it need support, and where do we need to step in, maybe even though it's not necessarily flagged as a high or even out of the optimal range, where we want to take action before the body is stressed out,
right?
And is starting to break down. And Dickon Weatherby alluded to this, the creator of ODX, but he also said too, is where people aren't settling for, I'm going to wait to get sick. They're really starting to seek out prevention.
I want to wait for that.
And so as a practitioner, being able to provide and knowing where to look, where you can optimize somebody's health so they don't have to wait to get Parkinson's disease. They don't have to wait to get Alzheimer's. They don't have to wait to have the final trigger happen to get an autoimmune disease. And a lot of people are probably hearing those like, you can't prevent those. You can't prevent those.
Not only can you prevent them, but you can oftentimes reverse
them.
Right. And that's not heard of in medicine because Western medicine doesn't have the tools for that. I agree. Right. There are no drugs that say, this is going to reverse Parkinson's
or MS is gone, take this pill.
Or this is going to, reverse your autoimmune disease. There isn't. Right. But there are actions that people can take: lifestyle, diet, nutrients, right? There's no magic herb. I'm sorry. There's people who are looking to functional medicine or holistic approaches and saying, what's the herb? There's no herb for autoimmune disease. There's no herb for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. It's really understanding what's going on inside that person. Now it's common knowledge that Alzheimer's is related to blood sugar imbalance. They're calling it type 3 diabetes, right?
Yeah.
And if you're seeing some trends, right, we're seeing people's fasting blood sugars trending up. We should be testing their insulin. We should be testing their A1C. One thing that I mentioned this to someone recently, a colleague, and they were like, oh, I had never heard of that before. There's an enzyme called insulin degrading enzyme. Insulin degrading enzyme breaks down the insulin after it's used up and gets it out of the system. That insulin degrading enzyme also breaks down the neurofibrillary plaques that would be
Mm-hmm.
associated to Alzheimer's. So if you're eating too much in the way of sugars and starches and things that cause you to need a lot of insulin, and the insulin needs to be broken down, or if you do a fasting insulin and your insulin levels are high, and I'll get to what high is in a moment, then it allows for less activity of that enzyme
Mm-hmm.
towards this more important, or not more important, but it's an important task, right, of breaking down the plaques. And that's where it can be leading into a higher risk for Alzheimer's. But what I wanted to say about
Well, they call it type 3 diabetes now.
yeah, they call it type 3
3
diabetes.
diabetes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And I mean, when
absolutely.
we talk to Carrie too, when you're thinking of, like you said, that the rising predictive incidence of fatty liver disease, and like where it's almost looking like it's cirrhosis and getting fibrosis, the root kind of reason behind that is what? It's metabolic imbalances and sugars and stuff like that you're
And
starting to see.
yeah,
And then, like we were talking to Christy about Parkinson's, a lot of it is environmental toxins,
yeah,
neurotoxins and stuff that are happening, where you're like, okay, a lot of this can be shown if people are, again, getting like this comprehensive baseline thing. And there's things, like you said, you can do to stop the progression and even allow and support the body to heal itself so
yeah.
it can reverse it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I put a link in the chat here in the comments section. Hopefully you'll see it, but we'll make sure that it's in on all the platforms, because we're live on YouTube and Facebook and Facebook groups.
Yeah.
But that's why we put together this event. I mean,
Mhm.
we can call it a summit, but it's not like your typical summit with 75
Yeah.
speakers.
Mm-mm.
It's a 3-day event, 3 speakers a day, and it's really focused on helping to provide specific information related to some of the testing that everybody can do. It's available to all of us. And how do we do that? And how do we interpret it so
Yeah.
that we can help our patients not become sick? We can help our patients in the early stages as they become sick and turn it around so that we're not seeing the diabetic retinopathies happen. I've had people who were never diagnosed with diabetes who had diabetic retinopathy. And you say, how does that happen? Well, their blood sugars were all over the place. Nobody did the right testing to catch that. And it was damaging their retinas. I've seen people like that with damage to their kidneys from that.
Mhm.
They're put on kidney medications. And it goes on and on. And we need to be the conscientious practitioners who do diligence and look at these basic tests. So that was the first test, the functional blood chemistry. We'll
Yeah.
go into a lot more detail if you sign up and join us for this 3-day event. It's free. It's totally free. I
Yeah.
mean,
And like you said, we purposely kept it intimate. Like a
yeah,
lot of summits out there are 75 speakers. And like, let's just be honest, we're both big fans of action and implementation, not just consuming information for the sake of consuming it. And we also very strategically picked the speakers that we did that are experts in the field, but also they don't sit in an ivory tower, and they've,
yeah, they're
rolled up the
clinicians.
sleeves. They're seeing clinics. They've seen how stuff's applied, or there's some really brilliant innovators who have certain softwares and certain tools, and they've done the due
Right.
diligence of the research. They also have a peek of what's behind the veil, because there's a lot of, and she's going to talk about the next step, is just because like anything gets popularized, people want to make a profit off of it.
Right.
And that's why a big impetus behind the summit is we want you guys to be aware of what's out there. When you're seeing clients coming to you, oh, hey, there's this app. Oh, I saw, there's a $17 app that I can run my blood chem through. Okay, what could potentially be the dangers behind that? Well, you need to be aware that's out there, but then also too, that you're going to see people coming to you with this expectation of, okay, I want you to read my blood chem. What does my blood chem mean? What do my genes mean? So go ahead and tell them, what is the second test?
Okay. And before I do, I just want to throw one more plug out. Back in the day when I first started practice, I mean, I'm talking like 25, 30 years ago, I remember having people, I would talk to them about their blood, and they would say, hey, I just got my blood test back from my doctor. Can I make an appointment with you so that you can tell me what it means? Right. So people, this was 25, 30 years ago. Right. And now people are more and more into that because they recognize that there are some early clues in that. So the basic functional blood chemistry, or blood chemistry, but interpreted from a functional perspective.
A whole kind of
A whole
holistic
body
way,
thing.
whole person way, with the point
Exactly.
of personalized plan, right?
Personalized plan, right?
Not
just
just you
throwing
had
it out
3
there.
H's and 2 L's and I'm gonna write you a prescription.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So the other piece that gaining in popularity, the other test
Mhm.
is a genetics test, right? And so we're looking like, what does that mean? I can't change my genetics. Why would you even test it? Or I'm just going to get depressed because I have a Parkinson's gene or a
Yeah.
breast cancer gene. Or, oh, well, what am I supposed to do? Lop off my breasts because I have a breast cancer gene? No. What we know is that anywhere from 95 to 98% of the manifestation from a genetic variant imbalance is diet and lifestyle. It's the epigenetics of it. And so just because you have a gene doesn't mean you're going to get
It's a
that
destiny,
gene.
yeah.
It means that you're getting this gift of information that says, oh, I have this variant in a gene that, let's just say, aflatoxin, that breaks down aflatoxin. For those of you who know, it's a mold toxin. It's found in peanuts. It's found in grains that have been stored
Coffee.
in the grain silo. And it can be very damaging and dangerous and a cause of cancer. It's been associated with cancer. So you go, oh, I have this gene that makes that pathway more sluggish. So what do? Do you say, oh, well? Or do you say, oh, well, how do I reduce my exposure to aflatoxin so I don't need it so much, right? And the same thing with, there's genes for breaking down alcohol and caffeine and
sugars
sugar and
collagen injuries and
everything.
vitamin D, vitamin
Yeah.
A,
Yeah, and
thyroid.
nutrients that you may not be absorbing them as well, so you need to have higher levels. So the thing is, for most things, there's an action you can take. There might be a few genes that have been associated to be specifically related to a disease, and I think cystic fibrosis is one of them. But even then, if you do happen to have cystic fibrosis genes and you manifest that, which you will eventually, usually early on in life, then there's things you can do to support the system, right? How do I better support with my nutrients, with my food choices, with my environmental exposure? Some people are going to be more sensitive to mold exposure. Not everybody is going to get deathly sick. Some people are more susceptible to alcohol toxicity, right? And if we know that by looking at their genes, we can better explain to people the optimal lifestyle diet choices that they can make. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people breathe a sigh of relief. Like my friend, she was like, "I've never been so happy to find out what was quote unquote wrong, but like the reason behind it. I wouldn't necessarily say wrong, but what is the reason
Right.
behind
What's the
the
reason I'm getting
symptoms
these
and the
symptoms?
problem, you know?" And
Right.
she's like, "Great, now I know what to do about it, you know." Then you
Right.
have, then, like I said, data allows you to take the drama out of a lot of situations, so that now you can make a really confident decision. Or, you know, okay, you can ask more of the question of, okay, like, the now what? What's the next step for me? Versus a lot of people are just spinning and just like, I don't know what's wrong. Why isn't this making sense? They're telling me that I'm normal, but I just still don't feel great. Or I'm taking the medications and I still don't, like, it's like, okay, great. Now the numbers look okay, but I still don't feel
I
great.
still
Or
don't feel right.
now I have to take these 3 other medications because this one medication is now doing this, this, and this.
Yeah.
So again, that, I think that's the difference between being able to really try to determine what is the root cause reason behind something.
Right.
And I think it's very empowering. I think as practitioners too, we have a big responsibility, but such a gift too, to be able to steward the information that we're given. And like one of our speakers said too, he's like, we're starting to see, as we're seeing like the trends, is like now we have more accessibility to a lot of data. Like you said, you're one of the first people that were doing genes, right? It used to be thousands and thousands of dollars. Now we have access to these tests. And even Dr. Allen's, now people can have direct access to getting their blood work done. They don't necessarily have to go to their doctors to get it read, you know? So we're not seeing access as an opportunity, but also too is what happens if people have access, but then they don't know what to do
But they
with
don't
the
know what to do with
information.
it, right?
You know, if they're
Exactly.
just being, okay, now we have access to it, I can go spit my genes through this program and it's going to spit me out a supplement regime and stuff like that. So we really want people to understand, okay, well, how is, you know, all these tools that are now, like you said, becoming more popularized, how can we step forward and really support clients and not necessarily let them fall prey to a lot of the misinformation out there, and looking a little bit deeper where people are just kind of like that plug and play, okay, diagnosis, or fall into that kind of misconception of, okay, I have this symptom, I have a problem, and I can just take this pill, this supplement, this thing. And I think you do people a disservice because, and again, they're not seeing the whole picture. And I always tell that to like a lot of my clients is like the worst thing could possibly be like you feel like, oh, the symptom's gone, I'm all good. And you don't have the resilience to, if when something happens, to withstand that, to bounce back.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you're like kind of skating on thin ice and you're like, okay, but you feel good, you don't do anything, and then all of a sudden you do something and then something happens. Not necessarily you do something, but there can be an outside trigger that could happen.
Oh, an external trigger, a flood, a car accident,
flood, a mold, an emotional event that's there,
right.
or you get in a car accident or something. Is that something where if you, I guess they don't have built up baseline resistance, you have these little weak links, you have these patterns of compensation where your body's been crying out and has been trying to basically let you get by fumes. And you see that all the time. I say that there's people like, I was never the same after X. And it wasn't necessarily just
Right.
X, but it was all the things that preceded and then that X event. And again, too, it could be an environmental stressor, it can be emotional stressor, it can be a physical stressor, it can be multiple things going on. So we want to, again, empower our clients to be resilient and use these two tools to help support them.
Yeah. And in this 3-day summit, you're going to hear a lot of reference to tools that you can use to look at these and to see how do you help people to find things before they become serious problems. Now, of course, detailed history is super important. You have to actually sit with people and ask them the right questions. That 5-minute interview process that's common in medical practices because of the insurance reimbursement model, it doesn't work very well for folks, right? I get deep and deep and deep into what's going on. But for example, like in my own situation, both of my parents died suddenly of heart disease. We didn't know they had heart disease until they just died one day, right? 56 years old for my mom, 64 for my dad. They were not old. And my grandmother had heart disease. She had multiple heart attacks. So you would think, I've got to be careful. Let me watch and see. So I do my testing. And I don't, I do have some genetic tendencies towards heart disease. But what I have more of is genetic tendencies towards diabetes. We know that diabetes is a risk factor for heart disease. We know that blood sugar imbalances, high levels of insulin cause stiffening of the arteries that predispose. So my feeling based on that, only a feeling because my parents are gone and I can't really test them, is that their propensity towards blood sugar imbalance on both sides created that weakness in their system so that they had heart attacks. Yeah, we have a few of those heart attack type genes, but not the really bad ones, right? So it's when we know these things and we can warn people and we can explain to them, look, you've got this family history. You've got this particular set of lab markers. You have this genetic tendency. What do you want to do about it? Do you want to play Russian roulette? Or do you want to have some strategies for turning this around? And usually people want to turn it around. Yeah. And it's a good leverage point to know this stuff. So that's why we think that these are two super important tests that you need to be running. And it's dangerous to not run them and to not do it right, because people then get caught off guard. And like my parents, die suddenly without ever having been forewarned that there was a problem. So that's why we put together this event. It's
Yeah.
3 days, 8, hopefully the 9th
We
person.
got a bonus
We got a
person coming
bonus
in.
person that's we're waiting
Yeah.
on to hear if they're back from their vacation in time to do it. But
Yeah.
um,
But
yeah,
it's on implementation too. It's not just consuming, because we're
yeah,
going to be doing live Q&A sessions for the 3 days, and then we can talk about a couple of like the cool workshops that we're going to do, because we want you guys actually to be able to assess like where you're at, and maybe if there are any kind of gaps or any support either in regards to resources, or maybe see. And we're going to do a really cool workshop next Wednesday too, where we're going to kind of show you a couple different panels, but then also the difference for how blood chemistry is read conventionally and then kind of functionally. And it's really, really quite eye-opening. And I think you'll understand why some of your clients that are coming to you are like, what's going on? That whole thing of I'm normal, I'm fine. There was maybe only a couple H's and a couple L's, but what's missing? And we're going to do one report too, where there wasn't as many or as biomarker success that we would have liked to see. And then you'll kind of see from a different report too, that was a little bit more extensively, just how much more you can discern from having key markers in there. And you'll be able to see, hey, maybe I want to add those to my panels, or maybe that should be something to look at, especially when we're seeing, the kind of epidemic of health and where it's heading of how many percentage of people are metabolically unwell?
93.
Yeah. So only
93, and it was
70%,
88 a
7% of
few
people
years
are
ago.
metabolically healthy.
Yeah, I mean that's sad.
Yeah. So,
That's
and I mean, I think the really eye-opening thing, I mean, all the speakers were phenomenal, but like, Dr. Alan Hopkins, who is an ER doc, he literally took us through this beautiful PowerPoint presentation where you can literally see, um, you know, cardiovascular, like he sees it as an ER doc. And we talked about the rising incidence of certain kind of things that he's seen and why, and what you can do about it. But he took us through, okay, why is it important to have like an advanced cardio pan?
right.
What does those mean? He literally took us step by step and where you could see it literally and appreciate why knowing those different particle sizes really matters. And I can tell you right now, so many of the clients that I worked with, literally a lot of people, their GP told them, oh, that's an excessive test, because their total cholesterol was in range. And
Right.
then we did an advanced panel and we found a lot of stuff that was kind of scary to see, but we could take action on. And I could look at them confident and be like, great, now we know we have a baseline. We talked about that, having that baseline where you can take action from, but then you also have a reference point too, which I think is super empowering about why I think functional blood chem is such a critical thing that you need to learn as a practitioner, but then also for clients to have, because you can make better decisions from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you're intrigued and you want to know more, I put the link in the chat. I'll say it out loud and put it in again. It's the Next Level Health Practitioner Project.com. We'll put the link in the chat. I'll make sure that it's there in the comments. For those of you who are listening on whatever platform you might be listening on, like, comment, let us know that you want more information like this, and subscribe. And we're really excited about the next level health practitioner. What is the future, the doctor of the future, the practitioner of the future? Because it's got to be different than it is right now. There's too many people getting sick and dying unnecessarily, and we need to turn that around. So if you want to be part of that movement, join us for the Next Level Health Practitioner Project.com. And this is Dr. Rita Marie Loscalzo and Dr. Yvonne Castillo. And we're super excited that you listened in, and we look forward to spending time with you and getting to know you over the course of this project.
Thank you.
Thank you.